Greetings. So welcome to the first installment of my game theory sessions. In this sort of general installment, I will be covering basically a non-technical introduction to game theory, which essentially means an approach to game theory which is social in nature and focuses on rationality as it relates to human behavior. So through that, I'm going to be covering this book, all 15 chapters, 2 sessions a week, 2 chapters a week. The book is called Moral Calculations, Game Theory, Logic, and Human Frailty. So quite positive, as we know we're all quite, frail, etc. The author is Laszlo Mero. I don't know if I've butchered that pronunciation, but Mero is a Hungarian psychologist, experimental researcher. He also has ties to computer software development, so computer science, as you can imagine, on games. So I'm going to link the where to buy this book in the description. So if you like this content, rather than just following along with the installments, I would strongly recommend and hope that you would look into buying the book and supporting the author, because it is a great book. It is extremely thought-provoking. It is intellectually rigorous, rigorous and riveting. Yeah, its rigor is riveting. So yes, so purchase the book if you like the content, support the author, and so by way of that, I won't cover every specific detail of the book. I'll just cover broadly the main ideas. So with that being said, I don't know if I really want to define game theory or if I want to let it sort of emerge naturally through the discussion. I think I lean towards the latter, so all I'm going to say is that as regards us here, game theory is about logic, rationality, and human behavior. So what is rationality? What is it to act rationally? What about games, so situations in which two people enter to either to have some gain, essentially, to risk a loss and have a gain. So what do those situations of different kinds of games show us about human rationality? Are we always rational? Is it possible to always be rational? What are the limitations of human rationality? What are the paradoxes, even? And that's what we're really going to get into today. So, with that being said, let's break into it. Alright, so the dollar auction was originally developed by the Yale economist Martin Shubrick in 1971. So a little bit old school here, but potent nonetheless. So dollar auction. So I'm guessing you know what an auction is. So let's break it down, just for fun's sake. All right. So in your typical auction, here we go. We've got the auctioneer, and we've typically got multiple possible players, but the auction typically comes down to 2 people. And in our specific dollar auction, that is also the case. So we'll say we have extraneous player here that eventually weeds themselves out, and etc. here. And then we have prime player 1 here, prime player 2 here. And what happens is each of these players makes a bet to the auctioneer for whatever the auctioneer is selling, right? So in your standard auction, only the person with the winning bet pays the auctioneer to receive whatever they're auctioning. So the difference that comes in here for the dollar auction is that the auctioneer is selling or offering to sell $1. So basically you have players betting for this $1. Bidding starts around, 5 cents, 1 cent. Typically that's best for the game. But what differs here, or what's unique about the dollar auction, is that there's one different principle, which is that the loser, so the person who does not receive of the 2 remaining players, once it gets going, the person who does not win or does not have the highest bet or who bails out still has to pay their bet to the auctioneer for that $1, even though they will not receive the $1. So this is really a game in which not only are you not guaranteed to win, you're also half likely, you have a 50% chance of loss at the expense of no win whatsoever. So you're probably thinking, like, why the hell would anyone do this? Like, why would a person enter into this game knowing that? Well, as we're gonna see, we do that all the time in other areas of our lives anyway. But what I want to sort of break into first here, or sort of discuss the dynamics of, is that Martin Schubrick, I hope I'm Schubick, we're gonna call him Schubick, hopefully that's how you pronounce it. So he initially started playing this at parties. You know, people are a little bit intoxicated, the spirits are flowing, people are silly, you know, socially awkward too, you know, I mean, somebody offers something to do, everybody's probably like, let me get in on that to get myself off the wall. So typically you start this off at parties by having $1 and, you know, motioning out to the crowd who wants to play a game, you know, very Saw-like, like, would you like to play a game? Okay, so people in turn do play. That's what he's found. So people will enter the game, and they will bet. The average bet for the $1, guess what it is? Just guess. Okay, I can't hear your guessing. So $3.40. $3.40 for $1. This freaking auctioneer then is making like $6.80 off these, you know, goons here that are playing. So that's really something. So what's even more interesting about this dollar auction is that it's not just like some whimsical game that Schubick played at parties. No, he did this with students in his classes as well, and he also sort of recreated the conditions and produced the same results in laboratory experiments. So basically what he found is that people enter the game on sort of like a goodwill, like for fun. They're like, well, shit, let's just do it. And at the beginning, it is all fun and games, but there are 3 really critical points of the game. So let's just quickly go over those. So obviously, the first critical point of the game is whether it starts. So not exciting, just does it start. Number 2, when it reaches the 50-cent mark, and number 3, when it goes greater than $1, or once it reaches $1. So the reason why these are 3 critical steps, I mean, obviously it's critical whether it starts, but about the latter 2 steps is that what you see, or what Martin observed through his experiments, is that people's behavior and emotions start to change as the amount gets higher, right? So it goes from, like, you know, all in good fun to people's physiological responses to the situation changing. So people, like, some of his students tend to perspire even, you know, start to get angry, their language starts to change. So it goes from, like, all in good fun to one specific thing one person was quoted saying was, I'm not gonna be made a fool of. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna win this no matter what. So what's really interesting about that is, it's a little bit hard to articulate, isn't it? Because what we have here is a game in which there's something else, right? Like, it's not just, I want to win. It's, I'm willing to risk loss for something else. So I think the question is, like, what is that something else? Like, what are people trying to get at here? And I think one of the things that Merrill alludes to is found in Schubick's comment about the person who says they won't be made a fool of, is that it sort of turns into like an ego thing. So one example of this, like in popular culture politics, that Merrill points out is that if you observe, like, from 1964 to 1968 in the United States, during the time of the Vietnam War, President Johnson's sort of speeches about the war, the tone over those 4 years changed drastically, right? So at the beginning he talked about freedom and justice and doing the right thing, but as the years progressed and as it became more apparent that you're playing sort of like a losing game here, his speeches started to change in tonality towards honor, towards, you know, what is it here? Honor and strength and strength. So it becomes more of an ego thing. So this brings us into what's been come to be called the Concorde Fallacy. So basically, the Concorde was a supersonic airplane developed a joint endeavor by the British and French government. I can't remember in which year that occurred. Have to look that up. However, basically, both governments had a set amount that they were willing to pay for the project. But as the plans developed and as they started building it, they started to realize, like, this thing is going way over the budget. Like, this is, like, so far exceeding the budget that it's evident that it's no longer worth it. But they keep doing it. So it becomes a matter of sort of pride, or this idea that you can escape without a loss, right? So both governments keep pouring money into the project, even though with every dollar they put into it, they're getting farther away from the actual worth which they initially determined the thing was worth. But they end up producing the airplane. But the point of that is that, well, the way I like it that Marrow put it in the book is that really, even, like, it would have been more worth it, rationally speaking, that's the key there, like in terms of cost-benefit analysis, it would have been more worth it to stop right before putting in the last screw. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's kind of counterintuitive, right? So it's like, the idea is that I put in so much to this goddamn thing that even if I'm gonna have a greater loss when I put in that last screw, at least, you know, I'm gonna have the thing. So it's sort of like a conflict of rationality there. It's like, rationality cost-benefit analysis tells you, don't even put in the goddamn last screw. Like, leave it alone. Like, take your money and get the hell out of there. But then there's also this other aspect to that which seems completely rational too, which is that why the hell would I not put in the last screw? I mean, it's the last screw. I mean, you know what I mean? If I don't put it in, I won't have the finality, the total thing for all of my efforts. But if I do, even though I've had a great loss, at least I'm still gonna have this thing. So it's like there's that extra thing that I was mentioning before, like there's something else to it. There's something more about it. It's like there's something that seems greater even than just pure logic or pure rationality. And that's pretty goddamn perplexing. I mean, that's interesting. That's something. So this leads into something a little bit more poetic. So this also has another name, or comes in another form, I should say. The MacBethEffect. So I'm gonna have to read this one because it's a line from Macbeth that's sort of like, we're going back pretty far here, an early demonstration of this sort of conflict of rationality or conflict of behavior. So I'm gonna read this verbatim. Is that a thing? So the quote from Macbeth goes, "I am in blood, stepped in so far that, should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go e'er." So, to break that down, so the two words there that you're probably like, I don't know, that like obscured the meaning for me, were wade and go er. So, O-er, like O''er is taken to mean over, and wade is taken to mean to like go forward in some sense, or continue. So we can reread it with the common English, modern English translation as, "I am in blood, stepped in so far that, should I go forth no more, returning would be as tedious as going further, or going forward." So, damn, like, so it's so true. So, like, I mean, if you want to picture that kind of literally, like, picture yourself walking through, like, a huge mud pit. Like, for whatever reason, here you are in a jungle or what have you, and you've got to cross to get to some, you think there's some greater thing on the opposite end of this mud pit. So you go in, but once you get halfway through there, you're like, holy shit, like, half of this might be quicksand. I've stepped in so far that, like, I'm halfway through here, and I don't know, what's worth it. So when you're standing in the middle of that mud pit, you're like, well, shit, I'm halfway between the 2 points. If I go back, I get nothing. But if I go forward, I could potentially get something, even though, for example, it might be quicksand up ahead and I might sink. So what Shakespeare is saying there, I believe it's Shakespeare that wrote Macbeth, excuse me, I'm not an English literature major, although that's probably common knowledge, so we're gonna say it's Shakespeare for now. The point is that it would be just as tedious to go back. So there's something about human behavior, about the human psyche that says, you know what, no, there's something for which I'm willing to risk it. I'm willing to go forth through that quicksand, or in Macbeth's case, the blood, to see what's on the other side, because if I go back, it'll be just as goddamn tedious. Like, not only would I not get anything, but I've got to walk back through all that mud and sort of, have that, here's where the dollar auction comes in, that sort of humiliation even of loss, of having given up even, you know what I mean? Like, have had been the weaker will in some sense. So that's really, really interesting, and I think we can see that in our lives too. Like, one way I like to think about game theory, for something that's commonly quite problematic and difficult for me, is social relations with other people, to be frank with you. So, like, think about it in terms of a relationship, right? So, you enter a relationship with another person because you believe that, in making the sacrifices that come with having a relationship with another person, it's gonna lead to something greater. But oftentimes it can be the case, well, maybe not often, but maybe half the time, the relationship just doesn't work. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship where, like, you're trying and like you're doing all these things, but it's becoming increasingly obvious to you that, like, you're just not meshing. Like, it's not gonna happen. You two aren't going to, you're probably not gonna make it, but you've got this gnawing sense that, like, well, shit, we've been together for X amount of time, if I walk away now, I'm risking losing that abstract potentiality that could be good. You know what I mean? That ultimate togetherness or what have you. So it sort of traps you. And I think the same sort of thing happens in, like, even jobs you don't like. Like, consider working a job that just makes you, like, frickin' miserable, right? So, like, you've got ambitions, you've got stuff you want to do, but you've got this job and you're sort of tied, like, you can't leave it because you need the money, and it would cause this huge fiasco where gotta go and look. But really, by continuing it, you're just, like, perpetually wasting your life, right? Like, you're just wasting your time continuously. And the same thing applies to the principle of being, like, of the relationship with another person, because if you just keep going forward, that time that you're going forward, although you think you're chasing this potentiality, abstract goodness, you're wasting time that you could have spent, like, being alone, developing yourself, or, finding the person that's actually right and who isn't, like, a losing dollar auction for you. And the same thing with the job, because if you continue with the job, the more time that you spend doing it, the more you're taking away from your life, right? The worse you're actually making things for yourself while you think you're actually saving yourself. And the same thing goes to the dollar auction, especially once you get over the dollar. So they both have this idea, like, I'm still saving myself by continuing. But once you pass the dollar, it's like, well, no, you're both losing. You're both complete losers because, Donald Trump, you're a loser. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. You're both losers because once you're at the dollar, nobody's making a profit anymore. The only person making a profit is the auctioneer. So it's like, what the hell, man? So I think, like, how do we interpret that? Like, how do we, like, what is it? What is that, like, psychological mechanism that human beings have that keeps us in these situations that are evidently losses? And I think my analysis leads me to conclude that we can't help, in some sense, be invested in, like, some potentially good thing, or rather, there's, oh gosh, it's hard. So I think there's two dimensions. That's what I'm struggling with. There's two dimensions to it. It's one that, well, I've invested into it. Like, I'm too invested to quit. There's that mentality. Like, I've put so much into this thing that I've got to get something out of it. And then there's also the other dimension, number two, which I think is that idea of escaping without a loss, that illusion, right? That if I just, even though it's evidently garbage, if I just keep going forward, maybe I can, transmutate that garbage into something that's, like shiny garbage, like something good, something worth it. But, so it's a paradox because it's harmful. You can't escape the fact that you're going to lose. And I think that even applies to, like, you could also apply it to, like, friendships or life generally. So, like, you play the game of friendship, for example. You enter into a friendship, you develop, like, a close, deep bond with someone, but that idea of the illusion of escaping without a loss also applies, because you're gonna die. Like, one of you is gonna die, one of you is gonna leave the other sooner than the other, and that's gonna cause pain, etc. I mean, obviously that's not an argument to not have friendships, but I'm saying is that in life generally, it seems that really no matter what, it's sort of pervasive, this idea that you can escape without a loss, or rather, perhaps we choose to live in such a way that we disregard that idea. Like, we don't pay attention to the illusion, because if we were to pay attention to the illusion and let the illusion sort of, encapsulate everything, well, then we just fade into, like, nihilism. Like, what the hell would be the point of doing anything? There wouldn't be a point. It would just be, like, mindless nothingness. So I think that illusion is the illusion of something greater, getting some greater potentiality of something, is important to some degree. And I mean, like, yeah, like, it even applies to life itself, because life itself, you could say that we all sort of have this illusion that we can escape without a loss. Like, even, like, particularly religious people, I think, might be a good example, because they, go through life. I mean, I'm probably fundamentalist, I'm not trying to insult anyone, obviously, but I mean, if you go through life thinking that, no matter what, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and, I'm going to heaven, or maybe I'm going to hell, I'm going somewhere, but the idea is that I have this idea that I can escape this without some loss, that I can live my life, and it doesn't matter what happens here. Like, if I live in poverty, if I don't have good relationships, it's just my cross to bear. God is testing me. There's something else waiting for me. When in reality, there's no empirical evidence whatsoever. Like, yes, it's a beautiful idea, a nice potential actuality off in the distance that there's something else, but there's no basis for that. There's no logical reason why you should believe that there's something else. So it's an illusion, right? You construct an illusion that you can escape without a loss. And that applies to all of these things that we just discussed. And that is pretty problematic. I mean, it's interesting. It's devastatingly interesting, those mechanisms. Alright, so I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I think that dollar auction, and specifically that quote, that the illusion that one can escape without a loss, is really something to think about, and it's something to assess in your own sort of behavior as well, like in your own life, in your own relations with yourself, the things you do, whether it be your job, your relations with other people, or even like the activities you do, and to sort of just consider the way maybe that takes shape in your own life, and assess it. Just think about it. Yeah. I mean, I know I've been forced, and once I read it, I mean, I couldn't help but, over-examine my own life in the context of the dollar auction, because, yeah, I can't help but see that in my own behavior, and that's really interesting. These universal sort of ways that we're similar in our behavior, and the sort of paradoxical nature of those behaviors are, like, extremely interesting. So I hope you found this also quite interesting. And yes, so stay tuned. I believe that I will, after this session, also film session 2, in which I'm going to talk about a game posed in the Scientific American magazine journal, posed to readers by someone, D.F. Hofstetter, a particular game which is going to tell us some interesting things also. So if you like this, I hope you'll watch that video, and also subscribe to my channel.